Thanks very much. So, folks, I know quite a few are here, but I can see on the other side, a lot of you decided to watch it on YouTube, which is fine. So, if you have questions, you'll have to tweet it in or email, which is all great. So, we are fortunate today. My name is Bashir Fancy. I'm the president at BIZTEK, which is Business and Technology Professional Association of Canada. We're not for profit. We're all about education, certification, thought leadership. And what better person to have than John Ruffolo? And with us today, we're going to discuss the restarting of the business. Actually, John spoke at the summit we had in 29th, and the feedback we had was absolutely fantastic in that he touched how you could go about it. And obviously, we're going to go through, answer some of the questions, and John's going to do more on that, because I don't think there's a better person who can tackle this issue than John. In case you don't know John, he is founder of the OMERS Ventures. He was Vice-Chair at Deloitte. He is a founder and Vice Chairman at Canadian Innovators Canadian Council of Innovators. He's on David Suzuki Foundation. I believe you are a Vice Chairman there, right?
Yes, yeah.
And I can go on the list. I've just looked at a long list. That's why I left it. We're going to put it on when we are recording this. We'll put it on our website too. So you'll be able to see. It's a pretty long list, but more importantly, as I know John very well, he's got a phenomenal track record of doing fantastic things and seeing things which a lot of people miss. So that's why he's where he is, and the other guys. In other words, when we turn around and say some people wonder what happened, well, he makes it happen. So, so John, maybe I thought you could get it started, right? And then we can have some questions and stuff, right? Make sense?
Sure. Okay. Sure. Sounds good.
Okay. Then one of at the high level, and you tackled this issue quite well, is how do Canadians restart the business, given the last X number of months that we closed, people working from home, some businesses have actually disappeared, some are struggling, the government had to step in. What's the best way for them to now move forward, now that I think we're in stage 3 that you had referred to, right? Of
yes.
Opening up and all that. So how would you tackle it at the high level, at least?
Yeah, thank you, Bashir. I think that there is 2 steps, and the precursor step, and it's one that I'm currently working on right now in collaboration with the Ontario government, is first and foremost, we need to get people back to work. And when I say back to work, it really is back to the office. And when I say back to the office, that includes back to school for the kids, because the 2 are invariably linked in many cases. And if you set aside those folks that are either vulnerable or taking care of a vulnerable person, or perhaps the school situation is not solidified yet, ignoring those and setting those aside, what's becoming clear, and I think it's becoming clear to not only the government folks who I've been speaking with, but also to many CEOs of leading companies in Canada. When people were talking about productivity gains, and Bashir, we had talked about this very early on, I was highly skeptical. And what I kept on saying, and it's starting to show, I've actually had 12 in-person meetings over the last 2 weeks. And before that, I had 1 for all of the other weeks combined. And people miss the humanity of dealing with folks. We are human beings here. And you can't be Zooming every hour on the hour and think that you're going to have the same long-term productivity gains. It might work for certain roles in an organization, but I would just say for the majority of people in a company, particularly if you require any sort of collaboration, creativity, what have you, those short-term productivity gains are actually going to reverse itself and in fact chew away at culture and trust and what it means to work with some colleagues. Somebody really pointed this out at me, and I thought it was fabulous. For if you're in an environment where you have a lot of long-time employees, the fumes of your culture could last longer because you've built up this trust. But for many companies, where they're really worried is the onboarding of new employees or employees that haven't worked together very well. So they really haven't been able to build up trust and those implicit network connections inside of a company. And now companies are starting to see those things fray. And you're starting to see people starting to move away from one another, interestingly, and the ties starting to weaken. And one CEO in particular said something interesting to me, that there was starting to see a noticeable difference between those that are naturally introverted versus those that are actually naturally extroverted. The naturally extroverted were seeking other ways to continually keep those ties strong. But those that were naturally introverted, you actually needed them to go to an office, in essence, in order to ensure that they were interacting. And they're seeing those that need the interaction the most and who have most difficulty doing so are going to be the ones that are going to be disassociated very, very quickly. So there is a very strong push now for companies to realize we better get people back, not only for those reasons, but for mental health and other reasons. And so I'm working right now on a pilot to get certain employers back in the downtown core in tall buildings. And it's a program using massive testing and contact tracing. The reason why I think this is important is that it also will get people back, perhaps that some, there's a bunch of folks in companies that maybe just don't want to come back. Not that they shouldn't come back, but people kind of like wiggling their toes off of a dock in Muskoka as opposed to on a train platform. And so I think too, it's been a little easier to hide as well. And CEOs are noticing. And I think too, when you have half of your colleagues come back and you're not in the office and you don't have a really good reason not to be in the office, I think you might start sending a message about your commitment to the company or commitment to your career, because maybe you don't really care about the collaboration. Not saying that's true for a lot of all the folks. I'm just telling you what's going through people's minds. So this is a critical first step to get everybody, other than those non-vulnerable folks, so that people have good reasons, not including those, but the folks that should be back, because this will really restart as normal as possible the true stage 3 that you and I talked about of how do you now move forward from a business perspective. And this is really where the beginning in my mind is now that you're back and now that things have settled to some extent, now you need to really look at your business and really identify where the vulnerabilities and where the opportunities are. And I think this is an amazing time to reevaluate the trajectory of your business. And I think that a lot of the solutions will be technology-enabled solutions. And it's not going completely one end, to a completely other end, but it's a rather this concept of flexibility and omnichannel. How do you get to your customers cheaply, easily, with greater insights, etc., either through human touch or not through human touch? And the answer is it depends for some folks. And this is going to be the answer for a lot of companies. do your people have to be back to work 5 days a week? The answer is it depends. Have you created the environment that somebody can spend 3 days in the office or 4 days in the office and not miss a beat from a technological solution perspective? So that same concept of working from home now is the opportunity of working with your customers. And a number of the business leaders I speak with will say, we got caught flat-footed. We knew all along that we needed to be connected to our customers in an online world too. But now what COVID did, it gave us the shot in the arm to realize, oh my God, if we don't do this now, we are done from a competitive perspective.
So John, very powerful. So if we now take what you just said, which is interesting, and I go back to the comment you made last time, which was that COVID didn't create the problem, it exposed them and magnified them, right? To worsen them.
Correct. Yes.
Hasn't COVID done the same thing for the employment force in the company? So if you turn around and look at this, is exactly what you're just saying, that some people are self-starters, the others are not, right?
Absolutely. So great insight. So just to repeat what Bashir said, what my view was, COVID hasn't changed anything. What it's done, it's accentuated underlying trends that have been there for years, but we're having difficulty getting product market fit, or it exposed vulnerability. So, it was interesting what you just said, and I never thought about that. It may expose people that perhaps, not have been pulling their weight very well. As one CEO of a very well-known company in Canada told me just last Thursday, he has 2 of his sons working in the business, and his 2 sons had asked him, so Dad, when we open up the office, which they were planning for Labor Day, do you think it makes sense for us to come back too? And the father looked at him and he just said, hey, you can decide with whatever you want. But by the way, if you choose not to, don't expect a paycheck either. So the sons will make the right decision. But it was fascinating. And again, it's not about coming to work 5 days a week for the heck of it either. But in the context of this particular company, there was a real desire for getting the people. It's a very collaborative organization. So I agree with you, Bashir. I think this is this amazing opportunity to look for opportunities, but to also, maybe, you're concerned about, not all the employees are pushing their weight, and there was a term called the COVID cover. And I think people are going to use this as an excuse to say, you know what, they really weren't committed. And you know what, this is as good as a time as any to do a little bit of house cleaning and just to be a little bit of meaner and leaner. And let me tell you, the one country in the world that does that better than anybody is the United States. And they will clean up any of their efficiencies so fast to be lean and mean, and coming through this, this upcoming recession, and they'll come out of it stronger than they've ever been.
So that's actually very interesting, which means 2-3 things. That if you take that down further, the skills that these employees had, because a lot of them were in the pigeonhole area, not because they didn't care about wanting to learn anything new, and there were others who were. So now the people who have got more skills will play an important role, right, based on that.
Yeah.
And 2, this is a fantastic chance to actually evaluate the whole data cycle, your business, your customers, and saying, hang on, I got a lot of redundancies here. Do I really need that guy? He stayed away for 3 months and the job's getting done, right?
Right.
Which is exactly what you're just saying in the US.
This is what's happening. They went, you know what? Yeah, the job's getting done. And what exactly were you doing when you were in the office in the first place?
That's right.
So I think, but again, there's not an excuse to lay off folks, but
Right.
all I'm just warning people is this is the time to reflect and to review your businesses and how they're operating. And that could bode extremely well for you, or it could be something that, you know, is a reason why you may no longer be with the company.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you're in the customer service role, it didn't make any sense for you to be there physically because we outsource it all over the place, overseas, whatever it may be. And you can do a job, you can monitor, but depending on what the other roles are, you better be there available because you know we talk about the water cooler effect. You talked about that already,
Right.
right?
Right.
A lot of ideas are shared, and in fact, people find out more about that than they do through communication, official communication, right? That has been impacted big time right now, and you address that. So that's very interesting. From a customer standpoint, so the HR will have an interesting role. They'll have to think differently to bring out the guys who are introverts, right? To make sure that if they're very smart, just because they're quiet or whatever, doesn't mean they can't contribute. Maybe they are contributing even now, but they need to sort out who are those versus who are not. So then that leads to similar thing with the customers, right? Which we have assumed automatically will remain, but that's not true, right? So now what do the businesses do differently to make sure that they understand the customer, they know what the needs are? Because we have been in the mode for very many years. I've seen it even in Canada. You develop something and then the sales guys go sell it. You don't care about the fact that the guys need it. You just sell the shiny tools. We see that on technology all the time. And companies have got duplicate tools and all that. Not that needed, but the guy on the sales side of the technology company was damn good. He was able to sell it to you. Now it means you need to understand your needs, right?
Right. Exactly. And Bashir, and this is a good example of the work from home. Somebody's hit my doorbell and it's stuck right now and it's just ringing in here. If you just give me 30 seconds
No
so I
problem.
can fix this, I'll be back one second.
No problem. I can just recap what you said. So, folks, by the way, as John explained, the bell that got stuck, this is very interesting, and we have said for a long time. That's BIZTEK has said that. By the way, work with us to understand the skills because we've got siloed mentality, siloed approach. That's not going to help anybody. We need to start thinking broader. If you go into some of the large companies, you don't even realize when the data comes in or whatever comes into you, what happens after that? And people have not taken too much interest because they were fine. What John's identifying, and we'll drill down further on some of these things, is what do you do differently for your employee? So that's actually, so it was a stuck bell, right?
Sorry for that.
No, it's okay.
Such are the interruptions that you never expect.
You can blame it on COVID-19.
Yes, exactly.
So this is actually interesting. We talk about skill sets. What can the companies do? So there's two sides to this. One is the employee, where you know the person has fantastic potential, didn't get a chance. But now what should the companies do, whether you're medium or large size, to actually bring the best out of this guy? Because we know that training has been one of the problems. And we've both heard people say, no, I'm spending thousands of dollars on training. And I said, yeah, but what are you spending it on? Are you spending it in the right places? And they have not been doing that, right?
Yeah. So on the positive side, this is where this comment, again, was consistent with many of the CEOs. Some of them had a dogma that you should be in the office no matter what you do. And you should be trained by other humans no matter what you do. And the great thing that I've seen is a recognition, particularly from large enterprises, realizing that not all employees should be treated equally or you should have the same view. And the impediment was that they would say is, well, we don't have the technology, or there was privacy issues or security issues where if you were working from home, I'll just give an example. You're working for a call center in a bank,
Right.
and usually they're in some nondescript suburban area, and all of your interaction is done through the computer. All of your training and all of your resources are delivered through there, and you basically don't really have to collaborate with any of your coworkers, really. You might have a more senior person to ask questions of, but many of those call centers, they do it technologically anyway. So why is that in a retail, or not retail, in an office location? And the banks in that example have now realized, oh my God, the people can be far more satisfied, eliminate the commute, and it really doesn't decrease the productivity or the long-term productivity in that situation. In fact, it increases job satisfaction because of the lack of travel. Well, now you start talking about, in that example, how do you onboard or deliver training to that particular individual? Well, you can now deliver it all on an online basis with a Zoom supporting for questions, etc. But you're now seeing companies looking at onboarding, which was always viewed as a traditional human-led activity, where you don't, for that particular example of workers. Now, at the same time, you don't also just blanketly say, well, you know what, let's kill all human training and we'll all do it online. Well, hold on a minute. That answer depends on what kind of role you have as well. And this is why I say this idea of trying to treat everyone with the same brush, I think this has been the biggest learning lesson. The answer is it depends. And you need to kind of think about it. And then when you actually tailor it to different groups like that, you actually end up with not only higher potential job satisfaction, but for the company, potentially lower costs because of the reduced real estate costs that will be required.
That's true. Talking about real estate, I was going to go to another place, but it's important where you brought it up. If you're a bank and you're working in the downtown towers, and one of the buildings that we had, if you think about the air conditioning or heating system is not the greatest, the HVAC and whatever, right? So it's high risk right now. I have heard, I don't know if it's actually 100% accurate, but that some of them are looking at strip malls and having smaller offices so that people don't have to be going up to 26th floor or whatever in elevators. And they could actually do staggered hours there, right? Would still mean people will get together, but
yeah, the question around HVAC, I mean, I've read, depending on which argument I'm going to fall on, I can hand you a report that supports either one, which is kind of frustrating that there's so much, and I don't even think it's even, I'm not even talking about the misinformation. I'm just talking about the incompleteness. And so the bigger issue that I've heard of what you just stated is
right.
not so much the HVAC issue. I can tell you that there's a lot of buildings in downtown Toronto that are not LEED certified, from a green perspective, but they're HVAC certified in terms of the most unbelievable quality air of any building that you're going to see. So that's been a recent trend that I started to see a couple of years ago. But the question that's undeniable, what you said, is redundancy. So there was a big move to consolidate people in single towers or single parks or what have you. And it's raising the question now of, maybe the decentralized nature, yes, it might create a little bit of inefficiencies or a little bit less collaboration amongst disparate departments, but it also serves as a critical redundancy in case something breaks out on a particular floor of the building or an entire building. You haven't wiped out your operation. So I think I've spoken to one firm in particular that was in the middle of consolidating all of their space. And now they're really rethinking on whether that was the right strategy. So they haven't made the conclusion as far as I'm aware. But it is making them think twice now.
So this is really an evolving situation, right? Given the fact that the two sides don't know, it'll play itself out in the next.
I think it'll play itself.
Right.
It'll play itself out. I think maybe should you have 50 locations? Probably not good from an efficiency perspective, but maybe you need to have 2 or 3. I don't know how it's going to play out, but you're right. I never heard about redundancy as an issue or backup, by virtue of a pandemic,
Right.
as a consideration to perhaps not consolidate. It's the first time I've heard of it.
So we've talked about corporate offices. How does it play out for small businesses like restaurants and public places where people like Ripley's museum or whatever, where they're indoors and but certainly restaurants would have a big impact, right?
Yeah. So 2 things. So those, the big question in my mind is the small businesses. So call it businesses, 10 people or 20 people and under.
Yeah.
So you divide those businesses into businesses that need to have a customer-facing presence, like a restaurant. And right now, the big question in my mind is, with social distancing, their margins were already very, very tight. Could they really supplement the lack of density in their restaurants with takeout or other revenue sources? And you're seeing a number of restaurants really try that, and some coming to the conclusion, oh my God, I'm making more money now with less staff than I needed before. So you're seeing that shake out. Where you're seeing it really hurt, by the way, is again going back to the towers, where there is fewer people in the towers. Any of the restaurants in the vicinity of large towers, say in downtown Toronto,
right,
are feeling it very, very acutely. But for them, I'm not sure it's going to change a lot of how people want to be fed eventually. Are people going to still go to restaurants? I think the answer is yes. Where I'm seeing an interesting development is companies that have about, call it 10 people or 20 people, and they realize that they could get on okay by not having an office, period. So no office for anybody. The interesting thing about that is that everyone's on the same equal path. So they all have to work hard to figure out about replacement strategies and how to get those same human interactions. I contrast that with a company, say 100 people, where 50 of them are back and 50 are not. Well, the truth of the matter is, I think the norms are going to revert back to office-led norms because we're just human. So it's just like if you're on a Zoom call, say before COVID, and you were the only one on the call and everyone else was in a boardroom in the office. Do you get the insights? Do you get people hearing you? No, right? So you feel I'm not getting that same interaction. But if everyone is online, then everyone is back to equal again, and they get to save the rent costs. And if that statement is true, there is a number of buildings that have many companies that have 10 people or thereabouts. And the big question in my mind is, over the course of the next number of months, are you going to see a big spike in inventory of a lot of subleases or these small leases? And I think the answer is you might.
It's interesting actually because one of the things that at least served me in my lifetime, and I know you are very much like that, is that when I'm in a meeting or whatever, somebody says something, I'm not just listening to the words, I'm watching their body language.
Of course.
And you don't get that on Zoom because somebody says something, but you can't see the other people of exactly what the reactions were, right?
Absolutely. 90% of what's said is nonverbal communication.
Absolutely right.
So I don't know how to do, I'm an investor. You think that I'm going to make an investment in a business that I really don't otherwise know the folks? If I've known somebody for a long, long time, you know, I may give that a pass. But let's just say it's a new relationship. Like I'm not like, you know, I don't know how they're reacting, and I agree. I need that human interaction, and it will be difficult, maybe not impossible, but difficult to somehow replace that.
But we talked about the tall buildings, which there are plenty. If you go into the park downtown or in the TD Center or BMO, whatever, there are all sorts of food courts, and this is two restaurants.
Yeah.
Now, the problem for them is going to be people rushing down the elevator, trying to come to, you know, in one place. But people like that, they could rethink and saying, you know what, use electronics as you talked about to enable that. Place your order. You don't have to come down. We will deliver to your floor. The one guy goes with a tray and hands them the food. Now you don't have the traffic, but suddenly that food,
Absolutely,
right? That could change. So it's just what you said, rethinking, reimagining. If people were doing that,
Yep.
it worked very well.
Yep. I have a company that I'm just trying to help right now, and you know their solution was relatively simple before COVID, and basically is, you know, when you go into an office and you go to a, you know, somebody's premises and you have to just sign in.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that on steroids, but you don't. It was all pre-designed of no touching anything. So, and that included elevators, etc. It actually read QR codes. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So everyone was worried about touching buttons and all this sort of stuff. You touch nothing. You just literally use your phone, and it knows which floor to bring you in, and it checks you in. And those innovations are going to be fabulous. And frankly, you know, for those of you who have been to China and Japan, you know, Japan's been doing this for as long as I've been traveling there. The first big mistake I made, and boy, did I get the dirtiest looks. I tried to open the taxi door with my hand, and you know how they have the automatic. Oh my God! And I was like, you know, I can do that myself. It was, no, I don't want you touching it, because it was a sanitary thing. And I thought, oh my God, like, why on earth would you do that? Well, let me tell you, I would not be surprised that one of the things that Uber should do is automatic doors, so nobody touches anything.
Which makes sense. So this is quite interesting. And it's thinking through the whole line, because there was a restaurant last week. It was like almost outdoor, pretty big place. And so I was going to meet somebody distance and all that. So they had the hand sanitizer, which is fine. Then I had to open 2-3 doors. And they were not only not automated, but after the third door, there was no sanitizer. And I thought to myself, guys are not thinking it's better for me to go through the 3 doors and have the sanitizer on the other side. It's like they hadn't thought through the thing. They reacted to say, all right, every sanitizer, put it in. It's like just doing it blindly, right?
I was in the Philippines, was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago? And I went into this very large but secure enterprise, and you needed, there was a lot of security clearances, but everything was a retina scan, and it was fascinating. And I just said, why did you guys pick retina for biometrics. And they just said, well, the security, but the second thing was they said, we also realized it was a great way to keep things clean so nobody had to touch anything, because the doors, the moment the retina scanned, they were all sliding doors. And I thought that was fascinating. And this was the Philippines. I just, was a little bit surprised. So again, seeing how some cultures were already thinking about this, I think it's just going to be far more prevalent here in North America.
Absolutely. You were in Makati, I guess. Right?
Pardon me?
You were in Makati.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting place. One of the things, John, that you talked about, it comes to, there are a few things inherent. We talked about security, privacy, which brings trust. The fact that only 5% people have downloaded the COVID-19 app tracing, right?
Correct.
Because they don't trust, right?
Nope.
How do we deal with that problem? Because that'll be the same thing for corporate world as well, right?
Yeah, and not to pick on Bashir, you asked me this question, 6 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And I said it was going to be a failure. And I actually used the proxy of Alberta. Alberta had 5% downloads. And I said, we'll probably end up around there. Well, there was two problems with this. Number one, it was a technological problem that, you needed to have a smartphone, number one. Not everybody has a smartphone. You needed to have a certain operating system on there. So you couldn't have a smartphone that didn't have an upgrade on its operating system. But more than that, there was a whole bunch of uncertainty as well in terms of its ability to detect accurately whether you truly were in contact with someone with less than 6 feet, and you had to be in contact with them, I think it was for 15 minutes, and then it gives you the alert. Well, it didn't account for, but what if there's a plexiglass there? It doesn't know that. What if there's 3 people there? What if there's 20 people there? What happens in high densification? What happens in a subway train? All those sorts of questions. So from a technological perspective, I think sometimes, and I'm a hardcore technology person, but Bashir, you've been in the consulting business for a long time. You always said it's all about people, processes, and then technology.
Right.
If it's more efficient. Whenever I see technology first, I always just go, you know what? What's the business process? What are you trying to accomplish? And et cetera. But the bigger question is what you just nailed too is, people are lackadaisical, number one, but number two, people have a significant mistrust on the use of data, and so they should. Now, what happened here is the privacy issues were sufficiently dealt with, I believe, but it actually came at the cost of the technology. And so you ended up in a suboptimal decision. Now, I downloaded it because it's the right thing for me to do from a community perspective. But unless people are forced to do it, or there is an immediate cost to them, even though the cost is, community transmission, I think people just generally don't do it. So my view was, if you were in an authoritarian state, yes, maybe you can get away with this, just like you can with facial recognition and sensors everywhere in public spaces. But in a democratic society, people generally say, I don't know how you're gonna deal with this data, and I actually don't trust you in the first place. So the counter solution to this, and one that hopefully you're going to see launched in the next couple of weeks, is, if that statement, what I said, is true, could you achieve the same thing a different way? And the way that I was thinking of is through an employer-employee relationship. So an employer has an obligation to make their premises safe. an employee, you have freedom to work for a company. If the employer imposes rules, if an employer says to you, I have the right to check the computer you're using to see if you're downloading porn, as an example, they have the right to do it. It's a condition of your employment. You have the right in this country to say nope. And I have the right as an employer to say, fine, go get a paycheck from somebody else. So the real question here is the incentive or the whether it's a carrot or a stick is,
right.
Hey, if you want to come to the office, you have to test and we have to contact trace. If you say no to, you better have a very good reason to say no to that. And just be prepared that an employer has an opportunity, perhaps directly or indirectly, to determine whether you are the type of employee that they want to have on a long-term basis.
Right. So the trust part we're talking about, so if it was backed up by law, we have PIPEDA, which was pretty advanced when it came 20 years ago, but we've done nothing with it since. But GDPR in Europe is a pretty high bar.
Yes.
And we need to go there. That would really help with this thing. People would feel more comfortable that my data is not going to get used, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I would say when it comes to GDPR is one thing, but when it comes to health data, this really strikes at people's civil liberties. And so that bar is so high to make sure that the trust level is high. So unless it's enforced upon, I just think it's still a science project. And the country in the world that had the #1 downloads of a similar app was actually Iceland. So first of all, they have a very, very small population, and they are much more community oriented than we are. And they still were only 38%. And for folks out there that are looking at what is the minimum efficacy or download that you require, it varies depending on mathematicians or statisticians that I've spoken with, but it is anywhere between 50 to 60% of the entire population needs to download it. And Iceland was at 38%. And that was the best in the world.
So that means we're going to need multiple things, not just one app will not do, right?
You nailed it. So it's not that it's a bad thing, it's okay. But if you think that's the panacea, and the problem the government did is they launched it with this fanfare saying, this is the solution, here's the panacea. And it's like, no, wait, hold on a minute. Don't tell people that that is the solution, because A, it's not, so you're lying, or you should know that you might be lying. But B, you're giving people a false sense of security, and you might imply that you shouldn't do anything else, which is nothing further from the truth. Even when I was looking at this massive testing and contact tracing, that was only to get inside of your office. But the moment you go to a food court or public transportation, you're back with that mask on and watching out for your social distancing. So again, while it deals with a lot of the issue, there is nothing that's foolproof. And the one misnomer that it just drives me nuts, we never ever had an objective of eliminating COVID, although if you speak to the medical community or the governmental medical community, they almost give you the impression that they're trying to eliminate COVID. That's not the right answer. We're going to have to, how do you live with COVID? Because I think that we're going to live with this all the time. And it's not be just COVID-19, but the next pathogen that comes about. Like, we need to change our hygiene habits as a society.
Right, absolutely. I think that's incredibly accurate. It's in the security business. You get into people telling you this will solve your problem. No, there is no silver bullet. It's an incremental layer, which is exactly this, right? So this, the two, we have enough time to deal with two questions. One is the new talent that we are attracting to Canada.
Yes.
Which is very interesting, that we can use. And the second one, what I wanted to talk about was the public-private partnership. Can't be better time to do this if it makes sense in certain areas of business, right?
Yes.
Like we were outsourced all over the place. Why can't we create a Canadian trust here in
Yeah.
areas which are, not very expensive, cost is low, and we could do a lot of, because we are going to end up with unemployed people as
Yeah.
everything readjusts, right? How would you go about doing those things?
Well, so for on the immigration front, you're talking about, or on the
immigration and then the private-public partnership.
sure.
Because it gets tied into that anyway.
Yeah, I'm excited on the immigration. I have been. I still believe that is a key cog into the future prosperity of this country. And when I look at a country, say like India, where they're graduating more engineers in a year than we have in the entire country combined, people shouldn't look at it as a threat to more competition for them to get a job. These are skilled folks that will add to the future prosperity of this country. And the United States is lending a valuable hand to reconsider Canada as your point of entry into North America and not the United States. And it's fascinating. Again, this was an underlying trend for a number of years. And then when the U.S. killed the visa, particularly for students, I have never received more inbounds, particularly from India, in my entire career. For some reason, I think they thought I was in the immigration field, and they love the idea of working or being close to the United States, but they're also realizing that if they're not welcome there, there's a country sitting on top of the United States that welcomes them, and I have close proximity to the United States as well. So I think it's something that we should embrace. And this leads to your second question. My greatest learning during this COVID time was more of not the accelerants that COVID provided, but the identification of exposures to our economy. And the two big ones was in the healthcare supply chain and the food supply chain. We really took it for granted. Those are two areas that I spent a lot of time in,
right,
but I never really focused my attention on the making or building stuff here. And so there is a unique opportunity where not only is that an interesting place to make money from a private enterprise perspective, that is becoming a focus of potential crisis or vulnerability from a government perspective. So if I am the government and I'm starting to think about, okay, where are we exposed? Well, as a nation, picking three things: energy, food, and health of a nation. And you could throw in education, but say those three. If you're operating the government, those are three areas now that you have to think about. And it's not about the government delivering that. They can't deliver all that.
right,
But how does the government play a role to support the private sector on ensuring that we're not victim to those supply chains? If we did not have such a great relationship with the United States, I cannot imagine what would have happened to Canada during COVID. It would have been a unmitigated disaster. We would not have had the food supply, or the fact that something as basic as masks, that we just didn't produce them. Like, oh my God, that's the thing that really shocked me. And we had to rely on the kindness of strangers to pay them at a hell of a multiple. Let's figure this out and make sure that we don't get caught with our pants down again.
right. There's actually a question came in which is interesting. if you're an early stage startup with a super disruptive patent security technology, what approach would you take in this environment to achieve success, to make it work? Because the person who's asking, they've got a fantastic technology that they just
Yeah. Well, security is perhaps jumped to the very, very top of the concerns. You know, in an omnichannel world, yes, you could deliver your products or services or engage with your customers more efficiently and cheaper, but it also takes a few seconds for someone who's not in your home city or your hometown to access. You know, it's kind of interesting. Somebody painted this analogy. You know, if you had a bank in the old West, and you know you were worried about, you know, those bad guys coming into town, and you know you're always worried about that, and it's those three bad people that might rob the bank, and you would try to put all of the security in place to prevent those three guys, and hopefully they don't even ride into town. Well, now with your bank, anybody, any kid, any state, in any place in the world could rob your bank in seconds. And this problem is going to get worse. So security is perhaps the top of the agenda of every CIO that I'm speaking with. And if you have something unique, you know, one of the things, you know, and there was the key word that was written in the question was about the patents. I would be sure to patent that as quickly as I could, and get this out to market. From a product market fit perspective, I can't think of a better time, maybe since 9/11 is the last time, but I've never seen security at the top of the agenda for so many CIOs. And I would get this product out. It doesn't need to even be perfect, or maybe you have 10 things that it does, but if it does one thing really, really well, I'd be getting this thing here out and really iterating very, very quickly, because people will pretty much pay anything for this.
It's very interesting because we have a serious problem in cybersecurity area, because a lot of people have got into the business because they think they can make money rather than understanding security. There are veterans and other people who are there, and they're pretty good, but they are short in short supply, right? In that,
right.
So they have that challenge, which means we need to upgrade that area with skills, and that'd be quite interesting. One of the questions there was that, can you make the banks invisible? Well, that's where I think we're going with digital.
Yeah, I saw that. You know, I'd be curious to understand more of what Zach was thinking about, but I can tell you one area where you can make them, instead of invisible, but completely decentralized. This is why I was a big fan of blockchain, and particularly Ethereum. I do think this is a monstrously powerful solution to deal with single points of failure, so that if you have a decentralized blockchain as opposed to a single centralized bank, you in essence have dealt with the security issue. So I am, and it's no secret that, you know, you're seeing Bitcoin and Ethereum shoot right back up again. Now, that could be a function of the uncertain times, and perhaps Bitcoin value is correlating to gold. But I also do think that, and I was fully expecting this, the technological solutions, as an example for the blockchain, not Bitcoin per se,
right.
were fascinating. And we're going to deal with a lot of the concerns that I had around security, privacy, etc. But we needed to go through an implosion and the next wave. The next wave of some of the blockchain solutions that I've seen are absolutely fascinating. And I can't wait to see a lot more of these types of ideas starting to pop out now that perhaps were kind of floating in people's minds, but now is the time for the product market fit.
Yeah, I think it's actually fantastic because really you are absolutely right. In the Mark Carney has talked about digital currency, and it backed by blockchain, making it very secure, would actually reduce a lot of costs, but it would also be one of the things that you can see the banks are not paying serious attention to some extent. Some of them haven't actually, I should say, and they are putting themselves at risk by not moving because they've had the captive audience of the customer, right?
Yeah. And I'll tell you, part of the challenge is, so at least in theory, and I've seen a lot of the projects where instead of having a database of all of your information resident in one place, it's disaggregated across an entire spectrum. So if anybody breaks in or it doesn't matter because you don't have all the data in one place.
Right.
You have to weigh that against the desire of certain very, very large organizations who say, yeah, that's interesting, but you know what? I kind of like having all of your data because I get to monetize it, right?
Yeah,
so it's fascinating that in that example of the blockchain, that benefits millions and millions of small and medium-sized enterprises, not to mention the consumers. But for the big dominant tech companies, they're not huge fans of it.
No.
Because that means that they'll have to give up their privilege of having 100% of your own data. So it will be fascinating to watch that concentration of power versus the decentralization objective of not having a single point of failure.
I think, by the way, it's been, as we reach the top of the hour, it's been a fantastic discussion. John's covered collaboration, the culture, working from home versus working from the office, the good, bad, and the ugly. We talked about trust with privacy security, big issue. Talked about customer and making sure you are connected, employees connected, because otherwise you lose out. If you're an employee and you didn't take interest or you think you can get away by working at home and not doing your job, well, guess what? Maybe the free lunch is over. So there's a lot of fantastic stuff that John has given us here that for your benefit, we'll record and put it up there. I would go through it again because it's definitely got some very good stuff there. So not to hold anybody up beyond what we said, we're right from the clock too. John, this has been fantastic, and obviously we'll do more stuff. Your insights are invaluable because been there, done it, and you see opportunities when people just see problems, and that's the difference. Right?
It's my pleasure, and always have lots of fun chatting with you, Bashir. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. It's always look forward to, as the things settle down, we'll catch up for a beer.
Yes, that we will do. Okay, take care.
All the very best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.